Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another chapter of The Legend of Drizzt. Really, another two chapters, because combined, they're about the length of a single chapter that we've been covering these last couple of weeks. So, we're hopping in with a two-chapter day today. It's a Monday out there. It was a hot one out there today. I hope everybody got a little bit of time outside just to enjoy the nice weather, especially since tomorrow it's supposed to be a little more rainy in the morning. So that's not exactly the best time, but if you're into that sort of thing. Anyway, what you missed last time, if you did not tune in, was Drizzt has been sent to the academy for fighters, Melee Mag Thier, and he spent the first 50 days being lectured about the drow and their superiority to other races and their place in the universe and everything. And so after all that, they had their first grand bout to decide their places in the class. And Drizzt was paired up with his roommate, a student named Kelnaz, and they did quite well. Drizzt was looking to be the most skilled student there due to his training with Zack, but Kelnaz ultimately betrayed him and went ahead of him in the order. So that's where we find ourselves, picking up with Chapter 13. And here we go. Chapter 13. The Price of Winning. "You deceived me," Drizzt said to Kelnaz that night in the barracks. The room was black around them, and no other students stirred in their cots, exhausted from the day's fighting and from their endless duties serving the older students. Kelnaz fully expected this encounter. He had guessed Drizzt's naivete early on, when Drizzt had actually queried him about the rules of engagement. An experienced drow warrior, particularly a noble, should have known better. Should have understood that the only rule of his existence was the pursuit of victory. Now, Kelnaz knew, this foolish young Do'Urden would not strike at him for his earlier actions. Vengeance fueled by anger was not one of Drizzt's traits. "Why?" Drizzt pressed, finding no answer forthcoming from the smug commoner of House Kennefin. The volume of Drizzt's voice caused Kelnaz to glance around nervously. They were supposed to be sleeping. If a master heard them arguing... "What is the mystery?" Kelnaz signaled back in the hand code, the warmth of his fingers glowing clearly to Drizzt's heat-sensing eyes. "I acted as I had to act, though I now believe I should have held off a bit longer. Perhaps, if you had defeated a few more, I might have finished higher than third in the class. If we had worked together, as we had agreed, you might have won or finished second at the least," Drizzt signaled back, the sharp movements of his hands reflecting his anger. "Most assuredly second," Kelnaz replied. "I knew from the beginning that I would be no match for you. You're the finest swordsman I've ever seen." "Not by the master's standing," Drizzt grumbled aloud. "Eighth is not so low," Kelnaz whispered back. "Burgunyan is only ranked 10th, and he's from the ruling house of Menzoberranzan. You should be glad that your standing is not to be envied by your classmates." A shuffle outside the room's door sent Kelnaz back into the silent code. "Holding a higher rank means only that I have more fighters eyeing my back as a convenient place to rest their daggers." Drizzt let the implications of Kelnaz's statement slip by. He refused to consider such treachery in the academy. "Burgunyan was the finest fighter I saw in the Grand Melee," he signaled. "He had you beaten until I interceded on your behalf." Kelnaz smiled the thought away. "Let Burgunyan serve as a cook in some lowly house for all I care," he whispered back even more quietly than before, for the son of House Bainry's bunk was only a few yards away. "He is 10th, yet I, Kelnaz of Kennefin, am 3rd. "I am 8th, said Drizzt, an uncharacteristic edge on his voice, more anger than jealousy. "But I could defeat you with any weapon." Kelnaz shrugged, a strangely blurring movement to onlookers seeing in the infrared spectrum. "You did not," he signaled. "I won our encounter." "Encounter?" Drizzt gasped. "You deceived me, that is all." "Who was left standing?" Kelnaz pointedly reminded him. "Who wore the blue light of a master's wand?" "Honor demands that there be rules of engagement," growled Drizzt. "There is a rule," Kelnaz snapped back at him. "You may do whatever you can get away with. I won our encounter, Drizzt Do'Urden, and I hold the higher rank. That is all that matters." In the heat of the argument, their voices had grown too loud. The door to the room swung wide, and a master stepped onto the threshold, his form vividly outlined by the hallway's blue lights. Both students promptly rolled over and closed their eyes and their mouths. The finality of Kelnaz's last statement rocked Drizzt to some prudent observations. He realized then that his friendship with Kelnaz had come to an end, and perhaps that he and Kelnaz had never been friends at all. "You have seen him?" Alton asked, his fingers tapping anxiously on the small table in the highest chamber of his private quarters. Alton had set the younger students of Sorcerre to work repairing the blasted place, but the scorch marks on the stone walls remained, a legacy of Alton's fireball. "I have," replied Mesage. "I have heard of his skill with weapons." "8th in his class after the Grand Melee," said Alton. "A fine achievement." "By all accounts, he has the prowess to be first," said Mesage. "One day he will claim his title. I shall be careful around that one." "He will never live to claim it," Alton promised. "House Do'Urden puts great pride in this purple-eyed youth, and thus I have decided upon Drizzt as my first target for revenge. His death will bring pain to the treacherous matron Malice." Mesage saw a problem here and decided to put it to rest once and for all. "You will not harm him," he warned Alton. "You will not even go near him." Alton's tone became no less grim. "I have waited 2 decades, he began. "You can wait a few more," Mesage snapped back. "I remind you that you accepted Matron Sinefe's invitation into House Hanette. Such an alliance requires obedience. Matron Sinefe, our matron mother, has placed upon my shoulders the task of handling Drizzt Do'Urden, and I will execute her will." Alton rested back in his seat across the table, and put what was left of his acid-torn chin into a slender palm, carefully weighing the words of his secret partner. "Matron Sinefe has plans that will bring you all the revenge you could possibly desire," Mesage continued. "I warn you now, Alton de Vere," he snarled, emphasizing the surname that was not Hanette, "that if you begin a war with House Do'Urden, or even put them on the defensive with any act of violence unsanctioned by Matron Sinefe, you will incur the wrath of House Hanette. Matron Sinefe will expose you as a murderous impostor, and will exact every punishment allowable by the ruling council upon your pitiful bones." Alton had no way to refute the threat. He was a rogue without family beyond the adopted Hanettes. If Sinefe turned against him, he would find no allies. "What plan does Sinefe, Matron Sinefe, have for House Do'Urden?" he asked calmly. "Tell me of my revenge, so that I may survive these torturous years of waiting." Mesage knew that he had to act carefully at this point. His mother had not forbidden him to tell Alton of the future course of action, but if she had wanted the volatile de Vere to know, Mesage realized, she would have told him herself. "Let us just say that House Do'Urden's power has grown, and continues to grow, to the point where it has become a real threat to all the great houses," Mesage purred, loving the intrigue of positioning before a war. "Witness the fall of House de Vere, perfectly executed with no obvious trail. Many of Menzoberranzan's nobles would rest easier if—" He let it go at that, deciding that he had probably said too much already. By the hot glimmer in Alton's eyes, Mesage could tell that the lure had been strong enough to buy Alton's patience. The Academy held many disappointments for young Drizzt, particularly in that first year, when so many of the dark realities of drow society, realities that Zaknafein had barely hinted at, remained on the edges of Drizzt's cognizance with stubborn resilience. He weighed the Master's lectures of hatred and mistrust in both hands, one side holding the Master's views in the context of the lectures, the other bending those same words into the very different logic assumed by his old master. The truth seemed so ambiguous, so hard to define. Through all of the examination, Drizzt found that he could not escape one pervading fact. In his entire young life, the only treachery he had ever witnessed, and so often, was at the hands of drow elves. The physical training of the academy, hours on end of dueling exercises and stealth techniques, was more to Drizzt's liking. Here, with his weapons so readily in his hands, he freed himself of the disturbing questions of truth and perceived truth. Here, he excelled. If Drizzt had come to the academy with a higher level of training and expertise than that of his classmates, the gap grew only wider as the grueling months passed. He learned to look beyond the accepted defense and attack routines put forth by the masters, and create his own methods, innovations that almost always at least equaled, and usually outdid, the standard techniques. At first, Dinan listened with increasing pride as his peers exulted in his younger brother's fighting prowess. So glowing came the compliments that the eldest son of Matron Malice soon took on a nervous wariness. Dinan was the elder boy of House Do'Urden, a title he had gained by eliminating Nulfine. Drizzt, showing the potential to become one of the finest swordsmen in all of Menzoberranzan, was now the second boy of the house, eyeing, perhaps, Dinan's title. Similarly, Drizzt's fellow students did not miss the glowing brilliance of his fighting dance. Often they viewed it too close for their liking. They looked upon Drizzt with seething jealousy, wondering if they could ever measure up against his whirling scimitars. Pragmatism was ever a strong trait in drow elves. These young students had spent the bulk of their years observing the elders of their family twisting every situation into a favorable light. Every one of them recognized the value of Drizzt Do'Urden as an ally, and thus, when the Grand Melee came around the next year, Drizzt was inundated with offers of partnership. The most surprising query came from Kelnaz of House Kenefin, who had downed Drizzt through deceit the previous year. "Do we join again, this time to the very top of the class?" the haughty young fighter asked, as he moved beside Drizzt down the tunnel to the prepared cavern. He moved around and stood before Drizzt easily, as if they were the best of friends, his forearms resting across the hilts of his belted weapons, and an overly friendly smile spread across his face. Drizzt could not even answer. He turned and walked away, pointedly keeping his eye over one shoulder as he left. "Why are you so amazed?" Kelnaz pressed, stepping quickly to keep up. Drizzt spun on him. "How could I join again with one who so deceived me?" he snarled. "I have not forgotten your trick." "That is the point," Kelnaz argued. "You are more wary this year. Certainly I would be a fool to attempt such a move again." "How else could you win?" said Drizzt. "You cannot defeat me in open battle." His words were not a boast, just a fact that Kelnaz accepted as readily as Drizzt. "Second rank is highly honored," Kelnaz reasoned. Drizzt glared at him. He knew that Kelnaz would never settle for anything less than ultimate victory. "If we meet in the melee," he said with cold finality, "it will be as opponents." He walked off again, and this time Kelnaz did not follow. Luck bestowed a measure of justice upon Drizzt that day, for his first opponent and first victim in the Grand Melee was none other than his former partner. Drizzt found Kelnaz in the same corridor they had used as a defensible starting point the previous year, and took him down with his very first attack combination. Drizzt somehow managed to hold back on his winning thrust, though he truly wanted to jab his scimitar pole into Kelnaz's ribs with all his strength. Then Drizzt was off into the shadows, picking his way carefully, until the numbers of surviving students began to dwindle. With his reputation, Drizzt had to be extra wary, for his classmates recognized a common advantage in eliminating one of his prowess early in the competition. Working alone, Drizzt had to fully scope out every battle before he engaged, to ensure that each opponent had no secret companions lurking nearby. This was Drizzt's arena, the place where he felt most comfortable, and he was up to the challenge. In 2 hours, only 5 competitors remained, and after another 2 hours of cat and mouse, it came down to only 2, Drizzt and Burgunyon Bainry. Drizzt moved out into an open stretch of the cavern. "Come out then, student Bainry," he called. "Let us settle this challenge openly, and with honor." Watching from the catwalk, Dinan shook his head in disbelief. "He has relinquished all advantage," said Master Hatchnet, standing beside the elder boy of House Do'Urden. "As the better swordsman, he had Burgunyon worried and unsure of his moves. Now your brother stands out in the open, showing his position." "Still fool," Dinan muttered. Hatchnet spotted Burgunyon slipping behind a stalagmite mound a few yards behind Drizzt. "It should be settled soon." "Are you afraid?" Drizzt yelled into the gloom. If you truly deserve the top rank as you freely boast, then come out and face me openly. Prove your words, Burgundion Bainry, or never speak them again!" The expected rush of motion from behind sent Drizzt into a sidelong roll. "Fighting is more than swordplay," the son of House Bainry cried as he came on, his eyes gleaming at the advantage he now seemed to hold. Burgundion stumbled then, tripped up by a wire Drizzt had set out, and fell flat to his face. Drizzt was on him in a flash, scimitar pole tip at Burgundion's throat. "So I have learned," Drizzt replied grimly. "Thus a Do'Urden becomes the champion," Hatchnet observed, putting his blue light on the face of House Bainry's defeated son. Hatchnet then stole Dinan's widening smile with a prudent reminder. "Elder boys should beware second boys with such skills." While Drizzt took little pride in his victory that second year, he took great satisfaction in the continued growth of his fighting skills. He practiced every waking hour when he was not busy in the many serving duties of a young student. Those duties were reduced as the years passed. The youngest students were worked the hardest, and Drizzt found more and more time in private training. He reveled in the dance of his blades and the harmony of his movements. His scimitars became his only friends, the only things he dared to trust. He won the Grand Melee again the third year, and the year after that, despite the conspiracies of many others against him. To the Masters, it became obvious that none in Drizzt's class would ever defeat him, and the next year they placed him into the Grand Melee of students 3 years his senior. He won that one, too. The Academy, above anything else in Menzoberranzan, was a structured place, and though Drizzt's advanced skill defied that structure in terms of battle prowess, his tenure as a student would not be lessened. As a fighter, he would spend 10 years in the Academy, not such a long time considering the 30 years of study a wizard endured in Sorcerer, or the 50 years a budding priestess would spend in Arach Tinolith. While fighters began their training at the young age of 20, wizards could not start until their 25th birthday, and clerics had to wait until the age of 40. The first 4 years in Melee Magthyr were devoted to singular combat, the handling of weapons. In this, the Masters could teach Drizzt little that Zaknafein had not already shown him. After that, though, the lessons became more involved. The young drow warriors spent 2 full years learning group fighting tactics with other warriors, and the subsequent 3 years incorporated those tactics into warfare techniques beside and against wizards and clerics. The final year of the Academy rounded out the fighter's education. The first 6 months were spent in Sorcerer learning the basics of magic use, and the last 6, the prelude to graduation, saw the fighters in tutelage under the priestesses of Arach Tinolith. All the while there remained the rhetoric, the hammering in of those precepts that the Spider Queen held so dear, those lies of hatred that held the drow in a state of controllable chaos. To Drizzt, the Academy became a personal challenge, a private classroom within the impenetrable womb of his swirling scimitars. Inside the adamantine walls he formed with those blades, Drizzt found that he could ignore the many injustices he observed all around him, and could somewhat insulate himself against words that would have poisoned his heart. The Academy was a place of constant ambition and deceit, a breeding ground for the ravenous, consuming hunger for power that marked the life of all the drow. Drizzt would survive it unscathed, he promised himself. As the years passed, though, as the battles began to take on the edge of brutal reality, Drizzt found himself caught up time and again in the heated throes of situations he could not so easily brush aside. Chapter 14. Proper Respect. They moved through the winding tunnels as quietly as a whispering breeze, each step measured in stealth and ending in an alert posture. They were 9th-year students working on their last year in Melee Magthyr, and they operated as often outside the cavern of Menzoberranzan as within. No longer did padded poles adorn their belts. Adamantine weapons hung there now, finely forged and cruelly edged. At times, the tunnels closed in around them, barely wide enough for one dark elf to squeeze through. Other times, the students found themselves in huge caverns with walls and ceilings beyond their sight. They were drow warriors, trained to operate in any type of underdark landscape, and learned in the ways of any foe they might encounter. Practice patrols, Master Hatchnet had called these drills, though he had warned the students that practice patrols often met monsters quite real and unfriendly. Drizzt, still rated in the top of his class and in the point position, led this group, with Master Hatchnet and 10 other students following in formation behind. Only 22 of the original 25 in Drizzt's class remained. One had been dismissed and subsequently executed for a foiled assassination attempt on a high-ranking student. A second had been killed in the practice arena, and a third had died in his bunk of natural causes. For a dagger in the heart quite naturally ends one's life. In another tunnel a short distance away, Bergenjon Bainry, holding the class's second rank, led Master Dinan and the other half of the class in a similar exercise. Day after day, Drizzt and the others had struggled to keep the fine edge of readiness. In 3 months of these mock patrols, the group had encountered only one monster, a cave fisher, a nasty crab-like denizen of the Underdark. Even that conflict had provided only brief excitement, and no practical experience, for the cave fisher had slipped out along the high ledges before the drow patrol could even get a strike at it. This day, Drizzt sensed something different. Perhaps it was the unusual edge on Master Hatchnet's voice, or a tingling in the stones of the cavern, a subtle vibration that hinted to Drizzt's subconscious of other creatures in the maze of tunnels. Whatever the reason, Drizzt knew enough to follow his instincts, and he was not surprised when the telltale glow of a heat source flitted down a side passage on the periphery of his vision. He signaled for the rest of the patrol to halt, then quickly climbed to a perch on a tiny ledge above the side passage's exit. When the intruder emerged into the main tunnel, he found himself lying back down on the floor with 2 scimitar blades crossed over his neck. Drizzt backed away immediately when he recognized his victim as another drow student. "What are you doing here?" Master Hatchnet demanded of the intruder. "You know that the tunnels outside Menzoberranzan are not to be traveled by any but the patrols." "Your pardon, Master," the student pleaded. "I bring news of an alert." All in the patrol crowded around, but Hatchnet backed them off with a glare and ordered Drizzt to set them out in defensive positions. "A child is missing," the student went on. "A princess of House Bainry. Monsters have been spotted in the tunnels." "What sort of monsters?" Hatchnet asked. A loud clacking noise, like the sound of 2 stones being chipped together, answered his question. "Hook horrors!" Hatchnet signaled to Drizzt at his side. Drizzt had never seen such beasts, but he had learned enough about them to understand why Master Hatchnet had suddenly reverted to the silent hand code. Hook horrors hunted through a sense of hearing more acute than any of the other creatures in all of the Underdark. Drizzt immediately relayed the signal around to the others, and they held absolutely quiet for instructions from the Master. This was the situation they had trained to handle for the last 9 years of their lives, and only the sweat on their palms belied the calm readiness of these young drow warriors. "Spells of darkness will not foil hook horrors," Hatchnet signaled to his troops. "Nor will these." He indicated the pistol crossbow in his hand and the poison-tipped dart it held, a common first strike weapon of the Dark Elves. Hatchnet put the crossbow away and drew his slender sword. "You must find a gap in the creature's bone armor," he reminded the others, "and slip your weapon through to the flesh." He tapped Drizzt on the shoulder, and they started off together, the other students falling into line behind them. The clacking resounded clearly, but, echoing off the stone walls of the tunnels, it provided a confusing beacon for the hunting drow. Hatchnet let Drizzt steer their course, and was impressed by the way the students soon discerned the pattern of the echo riddle. Drizzt's step came in confidence, though many of the others in the patrol glanced about anxiously, unsure of the peril's direction or distance. Then a singular sound froze them all where they stood, cutting through the din of the clacking monsters and resounding again and again, surrounding the patrol in the echoing madness of a terrifying wail. It was the scream of a child. "Princess of House Bainry!" Hatchnet signaled to Drizzt. The Master started to order his troops into a battle formation, but Drizzt didn't wait to watch the commands. The scream had sent a shudder of revulsion through his spine, and when it sounded again, it lighted angry fires in his lavender eyes. Excuse me. Drizzt sprinted off down the tunnel, the cold metal of his scimitars leading the way. Hatchnet organized the patrol into quick pursuit. He hated the thought of losing a student as skilled as Drizzt, but he considered, too, the benefits of Drizzt's rash actions. If the others watched the finest of their class die in an act of stupidity, it would be a lesson they would not soon forget. Drizzt cut around a sharp corner and down a straight expanse of narrow, broken walls. He heard no echoes now, just the ravenous clacking of the waiting monsters and the muffled cries of the child. His keen ears caught the slight sounds of his patrol at his back, and he knew that if he was able to hear them, the hook horrors surely could. Drizzt would not relinquish the passion or the immediacy of his quest. He climbed to a ledge 10 feet above the floor, hoping it would run the length of the corridor. When he slipped around a final bend, he could barely distinguish the heat of the monsters' forms through the blurring coolness of their bony exoskeletons, shells nearly equal in temperature to the surrounding stone. He made out 5 of the giant beasts, 2 pressed against the stone and guarding the corridor, and 3 others farther back, in a little cul-de-sac, toying with some crying object. Drizzt mustered his nerve and continued along the ledge, using all the stealth he had ever learned to creep by the sentries. Then he saw the child princess, lying in a broken heap at the foot of one of the monstrous bipeds. Her sobs told Drizzt that she was alive. Drizzt had no intention of engaging the monsters if he could help it, hoping that he might perhaps slip in and steal the child away. Then the patrol came headlong around the bend in the corridor, forcing Drizzt to action. "Sentries!" he screamed in warning, probably saving the lives of the first 4 of the group. Drizzt's attention abruptly returned to the wounded child, as one of the hook horrors raised its heavy, clawed foot to crush her. The beast stood nearly twice Drizzt's height, and outweighed him more than 5 times over. It was fully armored in the hard shell of its exoskeleton, and adorned with gigantic clawed hands and a long and powerful beak. 3 of the monsters stood between Drizzt and the child. Drizzt didn't care about any of those details at that horrible, critical moment. His fears for the child outweighed any concern for the danger looming before him. He was a drow warrior, a fighter trained and outfitted for battle, while the child was helpless and defenseless. 2 of the hook horrors rushed at the ledge, just the break Drizzt needed. He rose up to his feet and leaped out over them, coming down in a fighting blur onto the side of the remaining hook horror. The monster lost all thoughts of the child as Drizzt's scimitars snapped in at its beak relentlessly, cracking open into its facial armor in a desperate search for an opening. The hook horror fell back, overwhelmed by its opponent's fury, and unable to catch up to the blade's blinding, stinging movements. Drizzt knew that he had the advantage on this one, but he knew as well that 2 others would soon be at his back. He did not relent. He slid down from his perch on the monster's side and rolled around to block its retreat, dropping between its stalagmite-like legs and tripping it to the stone. Then he was on top of it, poking furiously as it floundered onto its belly. The hook horror desperately tried to respond, but its armored shell was too encumbering for it to twist out from under the assault. Drizzt knew his own situation was even more desperate. Battle had been joined in the corridor, but Hatchnet and the others couldn't possibly get through the sentries in time to stop the 2 hook horrors undoubtedly charging his back. Prudence dictated that Drizzt relinquish his position over this one, and spin away into a defensive posture. The child's agonized scream, however, overruled prudence. Rage burned in Drizzt's eyes so blatantly that even the stupid hook horror knew its life was soon to end. Drizzt put the tips of his scimitars together in a V, and plunged them down onto the back of the monster's skull with all his might. Seeing a slight crack in the creature's shell, Drizzt crossed the hilts of his weapons, reversed the points, and split a clear opening in the monster's defense. He then snapped the hilts together, and plunged the blade straight down through the soft flesh and into the monster's brain. A heavy claw sliced a deep line across Drizzt's shoulders, tearing his piwafwi and drawing blood. He dived forward into a roll, and came up with his wounded back to the far wall. Only 1 hook horror moved in at him. The other picked up the child. "No!" Drizzt screamed in protest. He started forward, only to be slapped back by the attacking monster. Then, paralyzed, he watched in horror as the other hook horror put an end to the child's screams. Rage replaced determination in Drizzt's eyes. The closest hook horror rushed at him, meaning to crush him against the stone. Drizzt recognized its intentions, and didn't even try to dodge out of the way. Instead, he reversed his grip on his weapons, and locked them against the wall, above his shoulders. With the momentum of the monster's 800-pound bulk carrying it on, even the armor of its shell could not protect the hook horror from the adamantine scimitars. It slammed Drizzt up against the wall, but in doing so impaled itself through the belly. The creature jumped back, trying to wriggle free, but it could not escape the fury of Drizzt Do'Urden. Savagely, the young drow twisted the impaled blades. He then shoved off from the wall with the strength of anger, tumbling the giant monster backward. 2 of Drizzt's enemies were dead, and one of the Hokor sentries in the hallway was down. But Drizzt found no relief in those facts. The 3rd Hokor towered over him as he desperately tried to get his blades free from his latest victim. Drizzt had no escape from this one. The 2nd patrol arrived then, and Dinan and Burgundion Bainry rushed into the cul-de-sac, along the same ledge Drizzt had taken. The Hokor turned away from Drizzt just as the 2 skilled fighters came at it. Drizzt ignored the painful gash in his back, and the cracks he had no doubt suffered in his slender ribs. Breathing came to him in labored gasps, but this too was of no consequence. He finally managed to free one of his blades, and he charged at the monster's back. Caught in the middle of the 3 skilled drow, the Hokor went down in seconds. The corridor was finally cleared, and the dark elves rushed in all around the cul-de-sac. They had lost only 1 student in their battle against the monster sentries. "A princess of House Barristan del Armgo," remarked one of the students in Dinan's patrol, looking at the child's body. "House Bainry, we were told," said another student, one from Hatchnet's group. Drizzt did not miss the discrepancy. Burgundion Bainry rushed over to see if the victim was indeed his youngest sister. "None of my house," he said with obvious relief after a quick inspection. He then laughed as further examination revealed a few other details about the corpse. "Not even a princess," he declared. Drizzt watched it all curiously, noting the impassive, callous attitude of his companions most of all. Another student confirmed Burgundion's observation. "A boy-child," he spouted. "But of what house?" Master Hatchnet moved over to the tiny body and reached down to take the purse from around the child's neck. He emptied its contents into his hand, revealing the emblem of a lesser house. "A lost waif," he laughed to his students, tossing the empty purse back to the ground and pocketing its contents. "Of no consequence." "A fine fight," Dinan was quick to add, "with only 1 loss. Go back to Menzoberranzan proud of the work you have accomplished this day." Drizzt slapped the blades of his scimitars together in a resounding ring of protest. Master Hatchnet ignored him. "Form up and head back," he told the others. "You all performed well this day." He then glared at Drizzt, stopping the angry student in his tracks. "Except for you," Hatchnet snarled. "I cannot ignore the fact that you downed 2 of the beasts and helped with the 3rd, Hatchnet scolded. "But you endangered the rest of us with your foolish bravado." "I warned you of the sentries," Drizzt stuttered. "Damn your warnings!" shouted the master. "You went off without command. You ignored the accepted methods of battle. You led us in here blindly. Look at the corpse of your fallen companion," Hatchnet raged, pointing to the dead student in the corridor. "His blood is on your hands." "I meant to save the child," Drizzt argued. "We all meant to save the child," retorted Hatchnet. Drizzt was not so certain. What would a child be doing out in these corridors all alone? How convenient that a group of hook horrors, a rarely seen beast in the region of Menzoberranzan, just happened by to provide training for this practice patrol. Too convenient, Drizzt knew, considering that the passages farther from the city teemed with the true patrols of seasoned warriors, wizards, and even clerics. "You knew what was around the bend in the tunnel," Drizzt said evenly, his eyes narrowing at the master. The slap of a blade across the wound on his back made Drizzt lurch in pain, and he nearly lost his footing. He turned to find Dinan glaring down at him. "Keep your foolish words unspoken," Dinan warned in a harsh whisper, "or I will cut out your tongue." "The child was a plant," Drizzt insisted when he was alone with his brother in Dinan's room. Dinan's response was a stinging smack across the face. "They sacrificed him for the purpose of the drill," growled the unrelenting younger Do'Urden. Dinan launched a second punch, but Drizzt caught it in mid-swing. "You know the truth of my words," Drizzt said. "You knew about it all along." "Learn your place, second boy," Dinan replied in open threat. "In the academy and in the family." He pulled away from his brother. "To the 9 hells with the academy!" Drizzt spat at Dinan's face. If the family holds similar... He noticed that Dinan's hands now held sword and dirk. Drizzt jumped back, his own scimitars coming out at the ready. I have no desire to fight you, my brother, he said. Know well that if you attack, I will defend. Only one of us will walk out of here. Dinan considered his next move carefully. If he attacked and won, the threat to his position in the family would be at an end. Certainly no one, not even Matron Malice, would question the punishment he levied against his impertinent younger brother. Dinan had seen Drizzt in battle, though. 2 hook horrors. Even Zaknafine would be hard-pressed to attain such a victory. Still, Dinan knew that if he did not carry through with his threat, if he let Drizzt face him down, he might give Drizzt confidence in their future struggles, possibly inciting the treachery he had always expected from the second boy. "What is this, then?" came a voice from the room's doorway. The brothers turned to see their sister Vierna, a mistress of Aractinolith. "Put your weapons away," she scolded. "House Do'Urden cannot afford such infighting now." Realizing that he had been let off the hook, Dinan readily complied with the demands, and Drizzt did likewise. "Consider yourselves fortunate," said Vierna, "for I'll not tell Matron Malice of this stupidity. She would not be merciful, I promise you." "Why have you come unannounced to Mele Magthir?" asked the elder boy, perturbed by his sister's attitude. He, too, was a master of the academy, even if he was only a male, and he deserved some respect. Vierna glanced up and down the hallway, then closed the door behind her. "To warn my brothers," she explained quietly. "There are rumors of vengeance against our house." "By what family?" Dinan pressed. Drizzt just stood back in complete silence and let the two continue. "For what deed?" "For the elimination of House de Vere, I would presume," replied Vierna. "Little is known. The rumors are vague. I wanted to warn you both, though, so that you might keep your guard especially high in the coming months." "House de Vere fell many years ago," said Dinan. "What penalty could still be enacted?" Vierna shrugged. "They're just rumors," she said. "Rumors to be listened to." "We have been accused of a wrongful deed?" Drizzt asked. "Surely our family must call out this false accuser." Vierna and Dinan exchanged smiles. "Wrongful?" Vierna laughed. Drizzt's expression revealed his confusion. "On the very night you were born," Dinan explained, "House de Vere ceased to exist. An excellent attack, thank you." "House Do'Urden?" gasped Drizzt, unable to come to terms with the startling news. Of course Drizzt knew of such battles, but he had held out hope that his own family was above that sort of murderous actions. "One of the finest eliminations ever carried out," Vierna boasted. "Not a witness left alive." Our family murdered another family?" "Watch your words, second boy," Dinan warned. "The deed was perfectly executed. In the eyes of Menzoberranzan, therefore, it never happened." "But House de Vere ceased to exist," said Drizzt. "To a child," said Dinan with a laugh. 1,000 possibilities assaulted Drizzt at that awful moment. 1,000 pressing questions that he needed answered. One in particular stood out vividly, welling like a lump of bile in his throat. "Where was Zaknafine that night?" he asked. "In the chapel of House de Vere's clerics, of course," replied Vierna. "Zaknafine plays his part in such business so very well." Drizzt rocked back on his heels, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. He knew that Zak had killed drow before, had killed clerics of Lolth before, but Drizzt had always assumed that the weapons master had acted out of necessity in self-defense. "You should show more respect to your brother," Vierna scolded him. "To draw weapons against Dinan, you owe him your life." "You know," Dinan chuckled, casting Vierna a curious glance. "You and I were melded that night," Vierna reminded him. "Of course I know." "What are you talking about?" asked Drizzt, almost afraid to hear the reply. "You were to be the third-born male in the family," Vierna explained. "The third living son. I have heard of my brother Nal—" The name stuck in Drizzt's throat as he began to understand. All he had ever been able to learn of Nalfine was that he had been killed by another drow. "You will learn in your studies at Aractinolith that third living sons are customarily sacrificed to Lolth," Vierna continued. "So were you promised. On the night that you were born, the night that House Do'Urden battled House de Vere, Dinan made his ascent to the position of elder boy. She cast a sly glance at her brother, standing with his arms proudly crossed over his chest. I can speak of it now. Vierna smiled at Dinan, who nodded his head in accord. It happened too long ago for any punishment to be brought against Dinan. What are you talking about? Drizzt demanded. Panic hovered all about him. What did Dinan do? He put his sword into Nalfine's back, Vierna said calmly. Drizzt swam on the edge of nausea. Sacrifice? Murder? The annihilation of a family, even the children? What were his siblings talking about? Show respect to your brother, Vierna demanded. You owe him your life. I warn the both of you, she purred, her ominous glare shaking Drizzt and knocking Dinan from his confident pedestal. House Do'Urden may be on a course of war. If either of you strike out against the other, you will bring the wrath of all your sisters and Matron Malice, 4 high priestesses, down upon your worthless soul. Confident that her threat carried sufficient weight, she turned and left the room. I will go, Drizzt whispered, wanting only to skulk away to a dark corner. You will go when you are dismissed, Dinan scolded. Remember your place, Drizzt Do'Urden, in the academy and in the family. As you remembered yours with Nalfine. The battle against Devere was won, Dinan replied, taking no offense. The act brought no peril to the family. Another wave of disgust swept over Drizzt. He felt as if the floor were climbing up to swallow him, and he almost hoped that it would. It is a difficult world we inhabit, Dinan said. We make it so, Drizzt retorted. He wanted to continue further, to implicate the Spider Queen and the whole amoral religion that would sanction such destructive and treacherous actions. Drizzt wisely held his tongue, though. Dinan wanted him dead. He understood that now. Drizzt understood as well that if he gave his scheming brother the opportunity to turn the females of the family against him, Dinan surely would. You must learn, Dinan said, again in a controlled tone, to accept the realities of your surroundings. You must learn to recognize your enemies and defeat them. By whatever means are available, Drizzt concluded. The mark of a true warrior, Dinan replied with a wicked laugh. Are our enemies drow elves? We are drow warriors, Dinan declared sternly. We do what we must to survive. As you did, on the night of my birth, Drizzt reasoned, though at this point there was no remaining trace of outrage in his resigned tone. You were cunning enough to get away cleanly with the deed. Dinan's reply, though expected, stung the younger drow profoundly. It never happened. And there we have it. That's the end of today's 2 chapters. And as you can see, the drow are not a pleasant lot in the slightest. So, we'll have to see what happens tomorrow as Drizzt continues his education at the academy. He's finishing it up now, so that should be finished fairly soon. Until then, I hope everybody is staying safe, staying healthy, and I will be back tomorrow for another chapter. Good night, everyone. I'll see you then.